Hey everyone, my name is Astrei, and like many other Gen Z kids, I grew up with an unrestricted access to the internet, which means that I was part of those kids who begged their parents for a Club Penguin membership while the market crashed in 2008. Back in the late 2000s and early 2010s, virtual worlds aimed at young audiences saw a boom in popularity online, from the mainstream ones like Club Penguin, Mushy Monsters, or Webkinz, to the Panfus, Skylanders Universe, and World of Cars Online. Boy, were these games my... Not to be a boomer, but I am so glad I spent my developmental years crushing on Katsuma from Mushy Monsters instead of Fortnite skins. Which I arguably still do anyway. But that's besides the point. So tonight, instead of making an actual high quality horror video that pays my bills, I am going to talk about a dead game you've never heard of because I can't let the past go. I am sure we have all tried to find pieces of media we vaguely remember from our childhoods before. Media that, over the course of the years, has gotten lost in the annals of history. It feels like regardless of how deep you dive into the Wayback Machine, how many keywords you use, or how many old forum posts you find, your search always seems to draw a blank. Almost as if that piece of media never actually existed. Tonight, we will discuss the biggest virtual world that disappeared. One that I deeply loved when I was younger, and that I had completely forgotten about for almost 15 years. How can an MMO run by no one other than Cartoon Network, and with a player base that at its peak had over 12 million active players, not only disappear out of thin air, but be so obscure and forgotten about that most people watching this video have never even heard of it before? This is the Mundo Toonix Deep Dive. We will explore the history of one of Cartoon Network's most interesting cases of lost media, and the extremely grim cover-up surrounding its disappearance. Before I started writing the script for this video, I believed every Gen Z kid grew up and loved the Toonix because of how prevalent they were for Cartoon Network's marketing back in 2010, as turning your TV on meant getting bombarded by these wacky guys and their silly antics via bumpers, cartoons, an MMO, and even real-life merchandise. But, as it turns out, Cartoon Network never aired any Toonix content in Canada or the US. Therefore, there are no videos about the Toonix virtual world on YouTube in English whatsoever. Like seriously, I have never seen anyone bring up in an iceberg video, deep dive, or in a Gen Z nostalgia bait edit. Which means the story of Mundo Toonix was never shared across the world until today. A lot of my subscribers and followers on Twitter sometimes believe I am Canadian or from the US, which isn't the case at all. I am actually Latin American, more specifically born and raised in Mexico. So, because I am an up-and-coming retro slob poster, it is my duty to share with the world this really obscure and niche part of my childhood to those who missed out. For some reason, I've always held a strange curse that anything I ever hyperfixated on as a kid faded into obscurity in the years down the line. I'm serious, it's kind of getting annoying. Even in the Spanish-speaking side of the internet, no one really talks about the Toonix or how its MMO silently died despite being the face of Cartoon Network for years. So that's the reason I'm making this video. Having clarified that, did you know that the astrei channel is almost at 10,000 subscribers? Only 2.5% of the people who watch my videos are subscribed. Making this video was insane. A month of my life and 11,000 words later, I humbly ask you to like and subscribe so you can help me fulfill my dream of becoming a YouTuber.
And special thanks to Crackers with Chess for donating $10 to the channel.
Tonight, we're going on the Toonix franchise deep dive. We will discuss everything and anything that has to do with this mysterious era of branding for the Cartoon Network channel. From its long history, its spin-offs, how a virtual world like this one even became lost media in the first place, and the depressing reasons it closed down for good. Cartoon Network has had many different aesthetics or eras through the passage of time. From its birth in the late 90s with the rustic checkerboard era, the minimalist prism aesthetic that children see in their screens today, to the TOONIX era that lasted from 2010 to 2012, which we will explore tonight. The channel has gone through many different iterations for many generations of kids. Each Cartoon Network era was marked by two factors. One, the current shows airing at the time, as well as the artistic direction that their bumpers, logos, and jingles had going on for them. So, before answering what a Toonix is, we have to look back 6 years before their birth. Cartoon Network City, which started on June 14th, 2004 and ended on May 8th, 2007, is considered by many longtime fans to have been the best Cartoon Network era, and I can't blame them. This era has aged fantastically well, given that the artistic direction for their bumpers was incredibly unique. They consisted in having every Cartoon Network character living their daily lives in the real world and interacting with each other. I was still too young to fully remember this era, given that I was born in 2004. But I and many other kids thought that crossovers were the coolest thing ever. So seeing ads where both DK and the Agents and Ben 10 had to ride the SkyTrain of eternal damnation to the dark lands of Suri is really funny to think about. Now that I'm older, I can also really appreciate it from a marketing POV. Remember, back in the 2000s, ad breaks were unskippable unlike today, which was extremely annoying. But these bumpers were so well executed and non-intrusive that we're still talking about them nearly 20 years later with great fondness. Naturally, this era came to an end in 2007. But what would Cartoon Network even do to replace Sea and City? What is cooler than seeing your favorite cartoon characters in a massive real-life crossover? The answer is nothing.
I am nothing!
In the US and Canada, what many consider to be the worst set of eras for Cartoon Network released. From 2006 to 2008, the Yes era, the Summer 2007 era, and the Fall is Something Grown-Ups Invented era reigned supreme, which essentially all ditched using iconic cartoon characters for their bumpers, opting instead to use live action. The dark eras use graffiti, urban, and punk aesthetics to appeal to a more teenage audience, which seems to have been a growing trend on various kids' TV networks up until the mid-2010s. But remember, the channel is called Cartoon Network. Why would you use meat sacks if cartoon is literally in the name? The transition from Cartoon Network City to the dark eras was jarring to say the least, and the younger audience seems to have been dissatisfied with the change too, creating a sort of disconnect with the viewer and the channel. There were many factors that contributed to this, the most important one being that the channel was poorly managed by a guy named Stuart Snyder. The former head of the WWE later turned the president of Cartoon Network. Snyder did not understand what the audience wanted. I can assure you that the man responsible for Rikishi smothering his ass against innocents shouldn't be in charge of managing the network responsible for Hi Hi Puffy Amiyumi. And after a series of scandals that are their own can of worms, Cartoon Network's viewership steadily declined over these years, and with more cartoons that we now consider to be classics concluding, the network was left in a severe state of drought, struggling and in dire need of a change if it wanted to survive, which led to the creation of the NOODS. The very unfortunately named NOODS were the 8th era only in the English-speaking versions of Cartoon Network. These new mascots were intended to be a new fresh start for the channel, serving as a complete revamp in aesthetics. The NOODS were elongated 3D models with ears and stubby legs that did all sorts of things really. From being monochromatic to colorful or using Ben 10's dead skin as cosplay, the NOODS bumpers had them doing anything and everything. From literally just vibing and playing sports to whatever this is, which I think is pretty fucking badass. When I was younger, I grew up in Latin America, so I did not see the NOODS on TV, but I remember that I accidentally stumbled upon them while searching up something in the Cartoon Network website, and I hated how they looked. Some of these characters look fine, but the whole skinny legend thing doesn't really work well with every character. Like, why did they make Chowder anorexic? I'm actually really curious if any of you are from the US or from Canada and were alive during the NOODS era, which I'm assuming you weren't because my viewer base is made up of gay furries from Poland or 6-year-olds with no concept of good taste. What did you think of them? Do people remember the NOODS as just another boring ad, or are they fondly remembered? Because personally, the only NOODS I want to look at are your mom's "I'd tell you that, Buster Brown Gator dang." In the end, it seems like the NOODS succeeded to some degree in helping the channel stay afloat, and just like they came, they went in 2010. So, Astrei, you're probably wondering, if the NOODS were the face of Cartoon Network only in the US and Canada, what was up in the rest of the world? Remember how I mentioned that Cartoon Network City was extremely beloved and successful, and how replacing it with the much more inferior dark eras was a questionable decision by the channel? What if I told you that Cartoon Network City never ended in 2007 in Latin America? It actually concluded in 2010, and it was so beloved that they skipped the dark ages altogether. So what did they follow it up with, and how did they use Cartoon Network's USA's failure as a learning opportunity? I present to you the TOONIX Era. Back in the mid to late 2000s, among the TV channels made for kids, Cartoon Network was seen as the king in Latin America. Yet, oddly, the Cartoon Network website was not pulling the numbers its competitors were. This was the era of flash games for kids. Every big TV network had a website full of them. Disney, Nickelodeon, and Discovery Kids were all thriving, but Cartoon Network wasn't. Why? Now, we are all used to not only living with technology, but we understand how to quote-unquote use it correctly. Tech literacy is something that children seem to be born with nowadays. Literally, anytime I see a coughing baby holding an iPad, I audibly have to whisper, "Holy shit, literally Black Mirror," to not have a meltdown in public. But back in the day, tech savviness was a hard-earned badge of honor. See, the internet as a whole was only starting to take shape and become more common in Latin American households in the mid to late 2000s, as opposed to the 90s in the US or Canada. So, the reason that the biggest TV channel for kids was doing crazy good on air but not online was because children were not using the official Cartoon Network website to play Cartoon Network games. See, kids have a very peculiar way of searching for things on the web. On everyone's souls, including mine, we all looked up Foxy and Bonnie kissing when we were 10. To play Cartoon Network flash games, kids mostly used keywords like Ben 10 game or Play Samurai Jack in the search bar, which led them to unofficial websites hosting official CN flash games without permission. Naturally, very young kids won't be able to tell the difference between a malware website and the official URL www.cartoonnetwork.com.mx/LA. They literally do not even pay taxes, so what did you think? Whether it was an issue of bad web design or poor optimization of the SEO that led children to use unofficial websites, I don't really know. But Cartoon Network needed to do something that the other websites could not have to earn back the users who were rightfully theirs. So, at some point in 2008, Cartoon Network Latin America redesigned its website, something more accessible and fun, yet sleek and vibrant. But a new underpaid web designer wasn't the only change. The website introduced the TOONIX. The TOONIX were Cartoon Network Latin America's 5th era, being the direct successors of Cartoon Network City, which was the 4th. For all intents and purposes, the NOODS and the TOONIX started off as equivalents, white creatures that become colorful or mimic other cartoon characters during the commercial breaks. But, once again, how can such an iconic and timeless era like Cartoon Network City be replaced by a knockoff of another set of blank creatures that performed just okay? The TOONIX had crazy, massive, stinky juicy shoes to fill. But I believe they did it successfully. While in the US, the NOODS were the face of Cartoon Network's TV channel, the TOONIX saw the booming Latin American internet as a way to make bank and capitalize off the web and TV at the same time. These silly monochromatic characters known as the TOONIX were the face of the Cartoon Network website from 2008 to 2012, and in a wild turn of events, would eventually become the face of the channel from 2010 to 2012 across Latin America and in some places in Europe and Asia. Designed by an Argentinian graphic design company named Cuna, the TOONIX were based on their American counterparts, the NOODS, but with a square head and small chibi-like bodies, acting like blank sheets for customizability to let the creativity of players run wild. And so, Cartoon Network 2.0 served as a revamp for the website, where the TOONIX were the center of attention. Now, the website offered more than low-quality clips from Billy and Mandy or shitty flash games developed by someone from a third-world country. The lower half of the website now displayed a massive, totally non-intrusive banner suggesting you to create a TOONIX and join the Toonix's world. Being fully centered and separate from all the other flash games, you knew that creating a TOONIX was something special. Upon clicking the banner, users would get bombarded with a variety of features, patterns, accessories, and color palettes they could use to create their very own unique TOONIX. I actually spent countless hours in the TOONIX creator, and for some reason I really enjoyed printing them out and playing with the little paper cutouts in my room by myself, because Astrei is an only child. But why did the Latin American Cartoon Network executives choose to make their own mascot instead of simply using the NOODS? It certainly feels like a lot of extra effort to create a new mascot from the ground up, and eventually have to make a whole new set of bumpers for what was essentially a glorified web ad. Or why not make a nude creator instead of a TOONIX creator? I personally believe it boils down to two different factors. Number one, the regional preferences of each market, and number two, clue, the motives behind the creation of each mascot. Don't get me wrong, I am no business expert. I literally only took 2 business electives in college and hated them so much that I might be just talking out of my ass here, but I believe both existed to satisfy different needs for different markets. While in the US, the Noods were a direct result of trying to appeal to a cooler, more mature teenage audience, taking inspiration from vinyl figures and skating aesthetics, for example. In Latin America, the Toonix existed to make the Cartoon Network website more accessible, appealing, and inviting to very young kids who didn't know how to use keywords on Google. I also remember that, generally speaking, chibi characters did pretty well in Mexico back in the early 2010s. Characters like Tweety Bird, Chili Willy, or Hello Kitty were all really iconic and common to see in merchandise or in the messages that your aunt sends you every morning. I think the cool versus cute theory is further supported by the fact that localizations in the US tend to edit anything remotely friendly looking into something more badass. For example, editing Kirby to look pissed instead of smiley in game covers. I also saw one person online claiming that the regional differences occurred due to copyright issues, which I couldn't find anything to confirm the validity of, so I'll just put it out there just in case. Either way, the massive success of the Toonix creator in 2008 would eventually lead to them becoming the face of the Cartoon Network TV channel and getting their own Latin American exclusive virtual world in 2010. Talk about overreaching. Virtual worlds were the thing every company tried to get their hands on to make it big back in the 2000s. But what even are virtual worlds? These were online experiences mostly targeted to kids, where its users were able to interact with each other and the digital environment around them via the internet, with great emphasis on customization, creativity, and providing a safe environment for children to make friends. Mundo Toonix, meaning Toonix World in English, went through 2 major iterations. The early version, which we will be referring to as the first Mundo Toonix for short, because it sounds super badass, and the final version. The first Mundo Toonix is something that is genuinely intriguing. Through the course of the years, the first version of the game became, and I cannot stress this enough, completely lost. As it turns out, there's not a single video recording of the first Mundo Toonix, so you'll have to bear with me and pretend that this Club Penguin gameplay is actually the game I'm talking about. I am so sorry. This is a version I never got to play, given that it was only available from 2008 to 2009, which means I still hadn't developed a consciousness yet. The first Mundo Toonix worked more like a chat room rather than an actual virtual world, given that the main focus was the players' interactions with each other rather than being a minigame collection with interactive elements like Club Penguin. Which, speaking of, this version of the game is to Mundo Toonix what Experimental Penguins was to Club Penguin. In the first Mundo Toonix, players would register their accounts by creating their own customizable Toonix in the Cartoon Network website. The game itself took place in something referred to as the Cosmos, across a variety of planets. The planets were based on very specific themes, which was one of the main advertisement points of the game. Among these planets were the Cereal Planet, the Dojo Planet, the Party Planet, the Husband Hotel Planet, and the Stuffed Animal Planet at the very least. But witnesses say there were definitely more. It seems like each of these planets had one or more actual Cartoon Network characters in the background. In this case, we can see Billy and Mandy, or here, something that appears to be a McDonald's Play Place planet had Blue and Mac from Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends chilling in the background. Unfortunately, due to how long this version of the game was playable at, there are many other planets whose existence went completely undocumented. While writing down this script, I found a video by the user Red Apple about this exact topic. This user seems to have played this version of Mundo Toonix, so they actually redrew some of these lost planets. There are various users on the comment section of the video who seem to agree there was some form of symmetry world for them to explore. But now, what did the gameplay actually look like? The first Mundo Toonix was a top-down 2D game where its players could explore rooms and socialize with each other. The interface present in these screenshots also provides a ton of valuable information to understand the player dynamics. On the top left corner, we see the player's username along with their Toonix, a friend list, and the quantity of people currently in the planet/room. Right next to it, we see the credits tab, which worked as in-game currency. Players could use credits to buy furniture or to customize their character. As far as I understood and remembered, these credits credits were earned via playing games, but it also appears that, in a very appropriate fashion for a kids game in the 2000s, an option to use mom's credit card to purchase credits seems to also have been available. The middle top left of the screen displayed the time as well as which cartoon was currently on air in the Cartoon Network channel, which I think is really cool and really drives home how symbiotic the relationship of the channel and the website were at some point. At its right, players could see the live results for Votatun, meaning Toon Vote in English, which was a block in programming which took place every Saturday, where kids could vote between two prompted cartoons to determine which show would air for the following hour. I might add that little Astrei loved Votatun. The bumpers and commercials went so fucking hard, like oh my god. We can also see a button to turn off the music and another one to return to the actual Cartoon Network website. The bottom right corner says return to the cosmos, which worked as the map. This screenshot is probably how the cosmos planet selection screen looked. Now, this other button is an absolute mystery. We have a photo of Billy with the text, dive off head first into Zuka's pool, followed by a high amount of credits and a button to buy more. What? This might actually be an anthropology level mystery, because what the fuck does any of this mean? My first thought was that this had to be some form of side quest, but the button next to the credits says buy instead of something like accept. So what's the deal here? When aliens find our remains, like in the movie AI, they will be just as confused as I am. The mid bottom has a chat box to talk to other players. Since this was a kids game, the chat for minors had a profanity filter, while players who were over the age of 16 seemed to be essentially able to write anything in chat with little to no moderation. I don't think I need to spell out why this was an incredibly stupid idea, but well, we'll talk about it soon enough. Then we have what are photos of Billy. Again, for some reason. Apparently, these were emotions. Normally, images like smiles, frowns, or crying Toonixes would be displayed here. Obviously, after being clicked, the Toonix would perform said actions. I don't know why this is Billy though. At the very end, we see an option that says planet hopping, which was essentially a take me to a random planet button, revealing that the game must have had at least a decent amount of planets to choose from. Now, to end this segment, I would also like to talk about the obscure localization that the game received, which was naturally named Toonix World, being a direct translation from Spanish. This was Cartoon Network Latin America's way of spreading the Toonix brand across different countries. Surprisingly enough, despite having found clips from Toonix World that were of much higher quality than that of the first Mundo Toonixes, I couldn't find a lot of information about the time frame in which this localization was playable, so instead of dedicating a whole segment to it, I would like to talk about some of its major differences here. First of all, the international version, aka Toonix World, seemed to have been a platformer with chat room elements rather than being a chat room itself, as well as containing assets in 3D. Visually speaking, I'm a really big fan of the way it looks and the angle in which we interact with the game. It almost feels as if this was supposed to be played on a DS. Earlier in the video, we talked about the planets that were available in the first Mundo Toonix, and it seems like Toonix World might have had its own unique set of planets as well, as I found videos showing a game world, a training world, my world, and shop world, which maybe or may not have been part of the original Mundo Toonix. But the coolest thing in my opinion is the My World planet. In the international version, players actually owned a customizable planet, just like in Mormonism. Wow. I'm not really sure if the Latin American version of the first Mundo Toonix had an equivalent to this. It most likely had one, but I couldn't find any concrete evidence about it. My World worked like the igloos from Club Penguin or the cribs from UB Funkies, a sort of home where users could spend credits to buy furniture and decorate it as their hearts pleased. I found this clip from 13 years ago where a user decorated their world like a room, and here's an incredibly niche and autistic reference, but it reminds me of the Vanos Gaming video where they roleplayed as Toy Story characters. However, while watching this My World tour, I found something really cool. The interface present in Toonix World is completely different to the one we saw earlier or the one we will see in the future, which makes me wonder, to which extent was this game altered in the localization? If anyone from the UK is watching this video and you happen to have played this when you were younger, feel free to tell me all about it. The first Mundo Toonix was a massive success. Cartoon Network Latin America realized they had a golden goose in their hands. The Toonix and Mundo Toonix were so good at bringing new people to the website that the Toonix had become synonymous with the brand. And so, a new era for the channel had begun. The Toonix took over the web, earning the Cartoon Network website millions of users and a lot of cash. So a TV takeover seemed like the smartest move. The Toonix were a symbol for connecting the viewer to the channel, and so on August 5th of 2010, the Toonix era had officially begun. Every form of Cartoon Network marketing now include the Toonix in Latin America, the same way that the Noods did for the US. There's hours and hours worth of Toonix bumpers. Hell, they were so dedicated into creating a Toonix counterpart for every cartoon that even obscure shows like Master Raindrop and events like Cine Cartoon got one of their own. The quantity of Toonix content was so vast, there are still many Toonix related bumpers or ads that are lost media, despite how much was successfully archived. The level of dedication and detail is insane, and I feel it's worth reiterating that Cartoon Network Latin America could have easily gotten away with using the Noods instead, given that every bumper needed was already made. But they chose the mascots that kids across Latin America had already fallen in love with. While the Noods were simply the face of the channel, the Toonix were in every possible medium for Cartoon Network, dominating the web, TV, and even being featured in a McDonald's Happy Meal all the way back in 2013. So, if you're not sick of the Toonix by now, get ready, because the bumpers and an MMO were not enough to contain them, as they also had their own TV show type thingy. A series of bite-sized Toonix animations that were almost 2 minutes in length would sporadically air from time to time. Originally, in the first draft of this video script, I was only able to find 2 of these Toonix episodes online, but while proofreading, I actually found the entirety of these shorts available on YouTube in high quality and dubbed in British English, which was a wild find. I also refound my favorite Toonix episode that I completely forgot about. There's one where a Toonix called Agent Sheep infiltrates a secret base, but no one questions it because it's just a sheep. I just want to say that the world we see that the Toonix inhabit in these shorts are super creative and original. I haven't seen many other pieces of media with this artistic direction. It feels incredibly alien and foreign. But by far, and in my honest opinion, the best thing that has ever come out of the Toonix era was a little contest that Cartoon Network ran featuring the Toonix creator, where if a user signed up and designed a really cool and creative Toonix, they would be featured on TV. Imagine how thrilling it must have been for 5-year-olds across Latin America to see their own Toonix on TV for the whole continent to watch. I think that's a really nice way of getting your viewer base involved in your channel, and it's a really nice gesture to give back to the community. I don't know, even 20-year-old me would love to make an astrei Toonix and have it be shared across the world. So, after having taken this small break to talk about the Toonix on TV, let's return to the web and discuss the definitive version of Mundo Toonix. The Toonix takeover was in full swing, and it almost felt as if it was never going to slow down. Considering that the internet was starting to become more common and prevalent in Latin American households, there was a huge demand for a game like this coming from the Latin American sphere. And it looks like the demand was met, as Mundo Toonix, the game that started as a quirky character creator, later turned virtual world, had become a massive multiplayer online game with over 12 million registered users in just 3 years. In this current day and age, these look like rookie numbers. Like, there are currently more people subscribed to Morgs than people who played Mundo Toonix. But these numbers are still impressive, given that these 2 million users were all Latin American people. Just like Ninja's Low Taper Fade, Mundo Toonix was massive. In 2010, after the Toonix had officially taken over the Cartoon Network channel, the first Mundo Toonix was updated and revamped into a very different game, grabbing everything that made the first Mundo Toonix fun and made it perfect. We will call this second update / definitive edition Mundo Toonix for short. Initially, I want to mention that this is the version I played when I was a kid all the way back in 2010, so I must have been 5 or 6 years old at the time. Despite having been too young to remember a lot of the minor details or how to properly interact with other players, given that I didn't know how to read yet, I still liked it a lot and considered it to be aesthetically beautiful. If I haven't already made it obvious, I have always really liked the artistic direction every Toonix piece of media had going on for it, which is why I'm super excited to show you the final version of Mundo Toonix, which was simply stunning. The artwork is beautiful. These backgrounds and locations were full of creativity, and you can tell that there was a lot of passion in this project. Like, images like these are so deeply ingrained in my mind. The clash of the blue water against the orange vages of the sky. Somewhere deep in an urban location forgotten by time. It's just super cool. I remember that the Toonix creator received a massive overhaul, adding a ton of new accessories accessories, outfits, expressions, and costumes, as well as a new background that simulated some sort of backstage behind red curtains. The Cartoon Network character-themed items were the most popular by far. Finn's hats, a Big Chill outfit, a Pikachu fursuit, and Goku's hair were all extremely popular, and were by far some of the most common pieces of clothing you'd spot in-game. I really like this screenshot because everyone is rocking Goku's hair, and it really shows you how Latin American the game was in essence. Hi everyone, Astrei from the future here. It's been over 20 minutes since the video began, and I just wanted to remind you that if you're liking it, maybe you should like and subscribe. I have never spent this much time in a single video. Like, I started working on it 2 months ago, and I even got a promotion in my real life job. It's been a while. So if you'd like to support me and encourage me to make more videos like these, like, subscribe, and maybe share it with a friend. Doing these 3 things makes all of those sleepless editing sessions completely worth it. Now, back to the video. I think it's also worth mentioning that at the time, I don't know if the servers were overloaded or something, but trying to create an account from 2008 to 2011 to play the game was very difficult for some reason. There was a glitch that, after signing up using your parents' email with their permission, wink wink, the website would freeze and wouldn't let you join the MMO. I remember that I tried making an account for months to no avail, until the website randomly let me do it. Fun fact, my Toonix's name was Galleta Doom in all caps. The name comes from the word galleta, meaning cookie in Spanish, and the misspelling of the word Doom, because I was a really big fan of Victor Von Doom for some reason. As a virtual world, Mundo Toonix operated pretty differently than its first version. Yes, even if the goal was to have players interact with each other and both required creating a Toonix to join, the aesthetics and playability between versions were a whole nother story. While the first version of Mundo Toonix had the player hopping through planets to meet different Cartoon Network characters and mostly worked as a glorified chat room, Mundo Toonix's locations existed in a singular island instead of across the cosmos. The concepts for these locations were much more surreal and less cohesive than its predecessors, which might sound like an insult, but it's quite the opposite. So let's open up the map and talk about the Mundo Toonix locations. El Edificio Patricio, or the Patrick Building, was the place where most of the player-to-player interactions took place in. I also remember that there was some sort of cinema room where you could watch clips from various cartoons. This location will be important later on, given that there were repeated issues regarding chat moderation that the game struggled with, so don't forget about that. El Bosque de Albóndigas, or the Meatball Forest, where you could play 2 minigames. One where you had to scare off flies and bugs so they wouldn't annoy this thing, and one where you had to help an elder tree untangle spaghetti noodles so he wouldn't choke. La Fábrica de Pollos, or the Chicken Factory, was a pillow and textile dreamland where you could spawn colorful eggs that would hatch to reveal tiny little baby chicks. The desert area was known as Los Caminos del Pocho, meaning the Pocho Roads in English, which is really funny because Pocho is a pejorative word used in Mexico against Mexicans born and raised in the US. I'm sure this is just a coincidence, but it's really funny to think about. This area was connected to La Cueva Longeva, meaning the long-lived cave in English. These 2 areas were essentially a side quest where your Toonix needed to craft a potion to access a set of mazes and caves to meet the Oracle. I remember it took me forever to do this side quest as I didn't really understand the potion segment, but once I met the Oracle, I would have full gaming sessions simply dedicated to asking it questions. And because I was a brain-dead child, I actually thought that the Oracle was omnipotent in some way, and I fully trusted it. I don't remember much about Costa Totem or Totem Coast other than it being full of gigantic totems that would spin around. I don't remember anything else about it, so that's it. In this photo, we can also see the Patitas Crunch area, which I never actually got to see in real life, but it's basically just a brand tie-in portion of the map, with Patitas being just an Argentinian food brand. We also had Global Fest, which is just a vibe, and it's really cool to look at. That is everything I have written for this segment. There was also the Ben 10 promotional area that would lead you into its own separate side quest, where you explored the desert and turned into different aliens to arrive to the hidden plumber corpse hidden deep in the Toonix's world. I remember that when I was a kid, I couldn't figure out how to get into this elusive room, and I thought that being able to enter it would grant you access to the Omnitrix. I thought your Toonix would be able to transform into any alien you wanted, but while making this video, and in a very surprising twist of events, it turns out that the plumber's headquarters is essentially just an empty room, which is kind of cool to look at, but I feel so disappointed and expected so much more. And finally, the Copa Toon promotional area, which is its own can of worms, and we'll talk about it soon enough. Now, I would like to take a moment to talk about the Mundo Toonix interface again, so we can compare it to its predecessor. To start off, in the upper left corner, we see the Cartoon Network logo and the player's Toonix. Then, we see yet another anthropologic mystery, the elusive M button. I couldn't find any footage as to what this button could have done, and it might have gone undocumented altogether, but maybe I'm assuming that the M stood for messages, so it could have worked as some form of direct messaging? Then the credits tab, which we have already talked about, and next a progress bar that says La Gran Roca, which means the Great Rock. Once again, this one is a little confusing, but I think this could have been like an XP bar, and if you managed to complete it, you'd receive a title, being the Great Rock. Alternatively, it could have been a progress bar for a side quest, given the 3 out of 5 that is also displayed. Maybe it was like a collectathon sort of deal. Then we see the friend list again, which seems to have been left untouched, while in the bottom left, we see the Toonix, their name, a click here to chat option, as well as the chat log history. Right next to it, we see emotions and actions, with the former most likely being facial expressions, while the latter were dances, handshakes, or hugs. Then we see vehicles, which is an option I completely forgot about. It looks like the Toonix were able to ride mounts. I've only seen these tiny little yellow dragons, which makes me wonder if they were also treated like pets or puffles, and if they were added later down the line, as I'm not even sure if I ever got one of my own. At the bottom right, we see My Cube, which was the Toonix's customizable home. Once again, the players could purchase furniture, paint, and patterns to furnish their dream house. I have always liked that the Toonix's home was referred to as a cube. I don't know, it makes the whole Toonix experience feel all the more alien and small. Then we see the map that we have already talked about and the credits tab once again. I guess the Mundo Toonix devs were starving if they needed to showcase it twice. It also displays an option to redeem a code. The Toonix did a collaboration with a Mexican pastries brand named Gansito, where you could receive Toonix stickers and toys. I'm assuming that redeeming the codes would give you special accessories, furniture, or cold hard credits. So now, let's dial back and take a look at the section of the map I neglected to talk about, Copa Toon and the Toonix Spin-Offs. We have a saying in Spanish, los Toonix estaban hasta en la sopa, which would essentially mean the Toonix were so prevalent everywhere that you'd even find them hiding in your soup. And I feel that this is a very accurate sentiment. The Cartoon Network Latin American executives tried to diversify the Toonix into many other markets and mediums. So let's start talking about my favorite one. Football is the most popular sport in Latin America. Yes, I said football. You cannot make me call it soccer. I fucking hate the Antichrist.
Come on, brother, call it soccer.
The Antichrist, I hate the Antichrist, I hate the Antichrist. So, the Cartoon Network website had a yearly series of Flash and Unity games called Copa Toon, similar to FIFA, meaning Toon Cup. Copa Toon 2010 was a 3D game and my personal favorite, where the Toonix would be divided into 2 teams of 5, each team being represented by an iconic Cartoon Network character. Ben 10, Chowder, Scooby-Doo, Zack Saturday, and the Powerpuff Girls, and would play a football game against each other. This game is, to no one's surprise, fully lost, but I played it so much back in the day. I really dislike football in real life, but I spent countless hours replaying this particular version of Copa Toon. It had so much personality, cool animations that played anytime you scored a goal, and very pretty 3D models. I remember that what Baby Astrei loved the most about this game was that you could tackle both your teammates and the enemy team, and because I'm a violent, degenerate little fuck, I loved kicking the Toonix around. There were also 2 versions of the game, a web-based one, which is the one I played, and a phone app with less complex graphics. I couldn't find any info about Copa Toon 2011, but I did play the 2012 counterpart, which I didn't really enjoy as much as the first, as the game played more like an RPG card game rather than a real-time bloodfest. However, I still enjoyed the exploration parts of the game and preferred the team lineup, as this year, Adventure Time and Gumball, which are my favorite cartoons, were added, along with Generator Rex and the returning Ben 10. The game's genre was a card-based RPG, so winning a match would grant the player new cards to use in other matches. Copa Toon 2013, also known as Copa Toon All-Stars, was the one I liked the least by far. I remember it essentially felt more like a regular show DLC for the 2012 version. I don't think I ever actually finished this one, and I honestly kinda wish it wasn't lost so that I could take a look at what I missed out on. Escape Mugriento, or as it is known in English, Grubby Runaway, Kanye mentioned Let's Fucking Go! Is a game that was actually documented in its entirety and took a little less than 3 minutes to complete. You had to shoot a Toonix out of a cannon and have it land on a portal to progress to the next level and rinse and repeat. The game genuinely took place in a disgusting atmosphere. Level 1 is someone's innards, level 2 is a toilet, and level 3 is the 98% of people who watch my videos and are currently not subscribed. Join the astrei gang. The actual plot is as complex as Evangelion. The Toonix are stuck in a planet called Grossball, which could reveal that this game was made back in the first Toonix World era. I genuinely really dislike potty humor in media, so now that I'm older, I've grown to really dislike this game, as opposed to when I was younger, as I thought it was the funniest shit ever. Literally. Toonix Galaxy might seriously be the most mysterious game out of this deep dive. Looking the game up only leads to a singular video. This game seems to have had 2 versions, a browser version and a mobile app, with the latter having over 100,000 downloads. Yet, both versions remain completely inaccessible and therefore fully lost. The only reason I even know about its existence is actually quite interesting. Back in 2013, I found myself using my dad's laptop to play games on the Cartoon Network website, and for some reason, while browsing the web, I accidentally accessed the Cartoon Network Asia website, where there was a Toonix game not available in Latin America or the Anglo versions of CartoonNetwork.com. It was called Toonix Galaxy, and sadly, clicking the game would lead to an endless loading screen, so I never got to play the game. The only video I found about it is extremely low quality, but it appears to have been some sort of resource management game in a tiny planet, which I think is pretty cool, and I really wish I could have tried it out. And finally, the beginning of the end, SUPERSTADIA. SUPERSTADIA was released in 2015, meaning this was the last ever Toonix related game to have released. And honestly, I can't see why. SUPERSTADIA really feels like the culmination of everything the Toonix stood for. First of all, SUPERSTADIA was a spin-off that was targeted to an international market from the very beginning, not just Latin America. Given the broader audience, SUPERSTADIA probably is the most well-documented Toonix adjacent game thus far. There's actually high-quality playthroughs of the game in English on YouTube. SUPERSTADIA was an online game where the goal was to make friends and rivals. This was not just a chat room, but a sports minigame collection where players would compete against each other in leaderboards to see who the best athlete was. SUPERSTADIA contained the classic Mundo Toonix chat room-like mobility, as well as adding platformer elements, just like Toonix World, the first localization attempt. SUPERSTADIA also had its own built-in Toonix creator, which probably would have made the issues creating accounts much less annoying. It was set in a giant stadium, and its minigames were all sports related. Among them, we had Cannon Blast, where a Toonix is shot out like an acrobat and has to hit a target. High Wires, named after my favorite Tommy Mommy latex wall from Fortnite, which had the player jumping on springs and platforms, as well as balancing on high wires to get to the top of the world while collecting the highest amount of stars. Zorball, where your Toonix was inside a bubble and had to get dunked on in a hoop. Water Slide, which was essentially a budget-friendly version of Club Penguin sled racing, and finally, boss battles? I couldn't find any footage of this, but the SUPERSTADIA trailer says that you could challenge your favorite Toonixified cartoon characters into a match, which is pretty cool. The biggest tragedy surrounding the story of the Toonix is that we already know how it ends. The Toonix were forgotten, and Mundo Toonix, along with its contents, got lost over the years, unable to be found again. The MMO that used to be a powerhouse with millions of active users died such a slow death that, in the end, its servers were completely barren wastelands, to the point where most people who grew up playing the game are not even aware of when the game shut down, or that, how behind the scenes, despite being a kid-friendly game, Mundo Toonix was an extremely dangerous game for minors, as the MMO was under constant controversies over how broken its chat moderation was, that led to multiple cases of child sexual exploitation and blackmail. I find the death of the Toonix to have been a very interesting phenomenon. Naturally, because it was a Cartoon Network era, it had a pre-planned shelf life. But the interesting part is how a combination of multiple factors led to Mundo Toonix and the Toonix Era to have remained unspoken about in an international space for such a long time. How did such a massive cultural phenomenon cause no impact outside of its bubble? And how come the people who were inside of it never created a Toonix fandom renaissance, given that obscure media like Toko de Moisho or Domo still hold some form of relevance today? There were many factors that led to the death of Toonix, so we will go over a list of the most relevant ones. We live in an age where online safety is essentially second nature to us, and we know when and how to spot potential threats like scamming or blackmailing. But remember, the early 2010s were an extremely different time frame, especially in Latin America, which I already mentioned was in its early stages of having internet access as a commodity in households across the continent. Mundo Toonix was a game targeted to kids, which means the website needed a group of moderators and a really efficient language filter to ensure safety of children online, but that wasn't the case. In fact, depending on the age that the account holder had set after signing up to play the MMO, the in-game chat moderation would work completely differently. Players over the age of 16 could essentially get away with heavier swearing or talking about intimate topics with little to no moderation to other users who had also set their age to be over 16, which I don't think I need to spell out how dangerous this is. It was a fairly common practice for minors to create accounts with an age over 18 in every website they signed up for, which means that a lot of the people who were supposedly over 16 weren't. Children, therefore, could potentially be messaged by strangers that might have been adults in real life. The moderation seems to have been so bad from 2010 to 2012 that there were multiple cases of grooming that started in the Mundo Toonix website. It is also worth mentioning that the game did seem to have a private message texting option, where more personal information like full names or addresses could have been obtained. I remember that back in 2012, it was fairly common for kids to have Facebook profiles. When I was in the third year of elementary school, a lot of my classmates had Facebook accounts, mostly to play games like Dragon City, Farmville, or Jetpack Joyride. Facebook profiles typically contain a lot of private information, so I'm assuming that groomers could have taken advantage of the prevalence of Facebook in Latin American spaces and used Mundo Toonix as a platform to lure kids into giving away their private, real-life profiles, under the guise of playing games on Facebook together, when in reality their private information and a stable communication channel was all they wanted. Apparently, the Patrick building I mentioned earlier was notoriously infamous for hosting many instances of grooming, sexting, and cyberbullying. The target users of Mundo Toonix were at an age where they were still extremely malleable and innocent. Like I said, in my case, I played the game when I was 6 years old. Given the pretty art style and soft colors, it's only natural that their audience would be this young, which is especially disturbing given the amount of people that saw this as an opportunity to exploit and blackmail the young. The incompetence of the moderation team is an extremely upsetting thing to think about. Parents reported multiple cases of cyberbullying, sexting, blackmail, and extortions surrounding their very young kids. So Cartoon Network Latin America was under constant scrutiny and something needed to be changed. The channel has always taken a clear stance against bullying and promoting healthier lifestyles. So if their quote-unquote safe virtual world for kids had so many repeated issues involving these heinous acts, their brand was at stake. I know a lot of you in the comments may say, yes, although this was an issue with the moderation of the game, the kids' parents also had some degree of responsibility when it came to ensuring their kids' online safety. Which, although I agree with you, let's reiterate that at this time, Latin American parents were not fully tech savvy or even aware of the dangers that the internet could bring to the table, given that in some households they had never even used the internet before. Back then, you wouldn't expect that the silly marshmallow world full of smiley faces and rainbows could be plagued with such depraved monsters. So, at some point in 2013, Cartoon Network took matters into their own hands and completely restructured the game's chat, which ironically might have been the final nail in the coffin for Mundo Toonix. When it came to profanity, the automatic censorship system seemed to have been extremely flawed, with users claiming that many insults were able to be circumvented by swapping letters around with numbers or adding unnecessary spaces and punctuation marks in between. The way the chat operated reminds me of the state that the Roblox chat had back in 2016, where if you were cautious enough, you could essentially say any insult without repercussions or censorship.
Me gusta pus- Oh wait, that's not Spanish.
So, to save themselves from a lawsuit for child endangerment, Mundo Toonix completely reworked their chat filters and moderation. Children under 13 years old could no longer freely communicate by typing messages. They could only do it by selecting pre-written text prompts, similar to Club Penguin's online safety system. These messages were so simple and flavorless that making friends was no longer even possible, as real friendly interactions are not pre-written events, which defeated the whole purpose of Mundo Toonix being a virtual world. On the other hand, users over 13 years old were able to type their own messages, but the profanity filters were hardened up to 1 million. User GapMod mentioned that they were banned for a week for saying the word regenerar, which is translated to regenerate in chat. Literally just a random verb could get you locked out of your account for a week. I guess the word sounds somewhat similar to degenerate, but it is still not an insult. GapMod also recalled that saying very inoffensive words like gato, meaning cat, was enough to get a message completely obscured and censored. Once again, drawing a parallel to Roblox's chat and how their censorship rework of 2017 could get your account banned by simply saying the word yes.
Reason number 3. Harassment? Offensive item? Yes. Offensive item? Yes. What?
And last but not least is simple. The Toonix were found in every corner of Cartoon Network, so people simply felt tired of the Toonix. Remember, this era of branding lasted 2 years on TV and 4 online, and not being able to go for more than 5 minutes without seeing the Toonix does sound like hell if you dislike them. It is also worth noting that while we had the Toonix era from 2010 to 2012, Cartoon Network US had moved on from the Noods long ago, as they already had the Check It era up and running simultaneously for 2 years, leading Latin American viewers to feel stuck with an aesthetic they didn't enjoy, and wanting one they should have received long ago. Add that to the issues I already mentioned, plus Mundo Toonix dealing with game-breaking glitches, like your Toonix no longer being able to be customized and staying as a blank slate forever, that led people away from the game. All good things eventually must come to an end, and so, the Toonix era concluded in 2012. Check It was finally here, and with it, the Toonix branding abruptly disappeared from the channel, and day by day becoming less and less prevalent in the Cartoon Network website. Kids have bad attention spans, and their interests change quickly, so no longer seeing a million ads encouraging them to join Mundo Toonix in the channel or the website led the game to suffer a steady decline over the years. Even if the Toonix TV branding era ended, the game was still playable for some years, but their player base had already moved on. They didn't want to play a game where they could no longer make friends and were at risk of getting harassed. Latin American kids wanted to try out all the new Flash games that the Check It era website had to offer, and so the years passed. From 2013 to 2014, Mundo Toonix saw a decrease in players, to the point that entire servers would be empty. What was once a thriving spot to make friends had become the opposite, and so, in 2015, Mundo Toonix officially and silently closed its doors, unable to be played ever again. I know I might have addressed the death of Toonix as this very complex and difficult subject, but the truth is that the Toonix ended for a very simple reason. Children grow up and change, so there was no way for the Toonix to stick around perpetually until the end of times.
Hi, 3 AM Astrei here. I forgot to mention that in 2015 another set of Toonix shorts was released. However, the humor and substance were completely different, as the Toonix acted like minions rather than their former selves. I really disliked these as a kid, and I still kinda do.
Children get invested in different shows and different games all the time, so when they grow up and develop their own criterion, they look for things they like instead of consuming everything that's put in front of them. I myself fell in this category too. I loved the Toonix a lot, but I was so disconnected from them when the game shut down that I didn't even notice it was gone until recently. But that is not necessarily a bad thing, because even if I grew up and my interests changed, I am still very happy I got to experience how fun the Toonix era was firsthand. And although it is a shame it has gone under the radar for so many people for so many years, I am happy I got to make this video, sharing what made my childhood years so much fun, nearly 15 years later after the fact. Although this might be more of a tinfoil hat conspiracy than anything, I might as well add that I considered the possibility that Cartoon Network closed everything related to the Toonix because of the previously mentioned scandals, as if a journalist were to look up the game and the first thing they saw were accusations by angry parents due to grooming, that would be awful press. So maybe hiding the game in the dark could have been the way for Cartoon Network to get away scot-free. I remember feeling a little frustrated when I was younger over how dry the transition from the TOONIX era to the Check It era was. It almost felt like Cartoon Network was greedy and did not care about the Toonix at all. But hey, just very recently, Cartoon Network released the Toonix Creator to the Rap catalog back in 2023 to celebrate its 30th anniversary exclusively in Latin America. Which means that, despite the controversy, they still remember the Toonix and how much money they made. So even if the Toonix are gone, they're in a better place, peacefully sleeping after such a fun playtime session. Writing this script and researching for this video took the better part of a month, so if you'd like to see more Lost Media deep dives or online mysteries, aka schizo posting by your boy Astrei, make sure to subscribe to the channel today, like this video, and share. Mundo Toonix disappeared because of a lack of documentation, which makes me wonder, are there any Lost Media cases that personally affected you? Feel free to let me know in the comments down below, like seriously, I love reading Lost Media stories, and if it's interesting enough, I might make a video about it. There are a ton of videos I'm very eager to work on and I think you'll love. But before signing off, I want to thank you all for the support my Animal Crossing cult video got. It's almost at 200,000 views, and the channel essentially doubled in subscribers in a matter of weeks after I posted it. Which, like, legit almost made me cry one time, because making YouTube videos has been my passion since I was 10 years old, and have been making videos for almost half of my lifetime, so it's really cool to see that you're all enjoying it as much as I am. I don't know, with each passing day I feel more free and happy, knowing that I have an audience that likes the same things I like, and that I could make videos for a living someday. It's just so surreal, and I really want to thank you guys. So yeah, that's everything. I bet you're already tired of hearing my voice, so I will leave you and then I'll come back in a month for more Astrei slop. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, eat your veggies, and yeah, bye bye.